When the sun rose over the valley, the physical evidence was brief but baffling. A missing schoolmaster, a trampled Sunday saddle in the dirt, and a shattered pumpkin by the edge of a deep black brook. This was Tarrytown, a rural port on the Hudson. Just 2 miles away lay Sleepy Hollow, a sequestered glen existing in a perpetual drowsy reverie. The inhabitants, descendants of original Dutch settlers, live under a witching power that makes them see visions and hear music in the air. The most terrifying fixture of local lore is the galloping Hessian, ghost of a trooper whose head was carried away by a cannonball. According to the country folk, he rides forth nightly from the churchyard in a desperate, hurried quest to find his missing head before daybreak. In a community this isolated and deeply drenched in supernatural belief, the line between an actual ghostly encounter and a calculated hoax becomes impossible to distinguish. The man at the center of the mystery was Ichabod Crane, a lanky, eccentric schoolmaster from Connecticut. He was a traveling gazette, boarding with local families and trading gossip for food, carrying his entire worldly estate tied up in a cotton handkerchief. Although he was an educated man, Ichabod possessed a fatal psychological vulnerability. He had an extraordinary, unquestioning belief in the marvelous, specifically the witchcraft tales of Cotton Mather, which he studied with obsessive devotion. Ichabod frequently read Mather's direful tales until the gathering dusk made the pages a mere mist. On his walks home through the dark woodlands, his imagination would spiral. Every moan of a whip-poor-will or rustle in a thicket became a witch's token or a ghostly footstep. His paranoid, highly imaginative mind made him the perfect host for the town's superstitions. He was a man completely primed to be weaponized by the very atmosphere he lived in. The catalyst for conflict was Katrina Van Tassel. She was 18, blooming, and famous for beauty. But to a man like Ichabod, her most attractive quality was her status as the sole heir to a massive agricultural empire. The Van Tassel farm was a portrait of abundance. When Ichabod looked at the high-ridged farmhouse and the vast barns, his mind didn't see architecture, it saw future cash. He imagined roasting the livestock and the land into a portable fortune he could take to the frontier. Standing in his way was Brom Van Brunt, better known as Brom Bones. He was a burly, mischievous hero of the county, famed for his Herculean strength and his absolute mastery on horseback. Brom was a man of physical action who preferred to settle rivalries with a fight. But Ichabod was a supplejack, yielding but tough. He refused every one of Brom's invitations to a direct confrontation, stubbornly relying on a pacific system that left his stronger rival frustrated. Because physical force failed against an opponent who refused to engage, Brom changed his tactics. He abandoned the idea of a brawl and initiated a psychological war. He and his gang smoked out Ichabod's singing school and turned the schoolhouse upside down, making the superstitious teacher believe that local witches were holding midnight meetings in his classroom. The conflict came to a head at an autumn quilting frolic at the Van Tassels. After the dancing ended, Ichabod attempted to secure Katrina's hand, only to be dismissed. He emerged from the house later that night, looking desolate and crestfallen. Before his departure, Ichabod had been sitting with the old Dutch farmers. In the dark piazza, they shared war stories that slowly morphed into terrifying local legends. Brom Bones claimed he had raced the headless horseman himself through the woods, eventually reaching Wiley Swamp. Crucially, he claimed the ghost would only chase a victim to the church bridge. In that safe zone, the goblin vanishes in fire. Through this story, Brom effectively authored Ichabod's reality for the night. He had successfully planted the exact psychological triggers necessary to control the schoolmaster's actions during his long, lonely ride home. As Ichabod rode home on his broken-down horse, Gunpowder, the night was at its most dismal. His primed imagination turned the environment into a gauntlet of terrors. Every groan of a tree branch was a spirit. Every white patch of lightning-scarred wood was a ghost. At the exact crossing of Wiley Swamp, a massive figure appeared. It was a horseman of large dimensions, mounted on a powerful black horse and muffled in a cloak. As the figure moved into the light, Ichabod saw the horror. It was headless. Gunpowder bolted, and Ichabod barely kept his seat as the saddle girth gave way. He clung to the horse's neck and rode desperately for the church bridge, relying on the survival rule Brom Bones had planted in his head. Ichabod reached the bridge and cast a look back, expecting the ghost to vanish according to the rules of the story. Instead, he saw the rider rising in his stirrups, hurling his severed head. The projectile struck Ichabod with a tremendous crash, tumbling him into the dust. In this moment of extreme distress, Ichabod's educated mind ceased to function. He was no longer a schoolmaster. He was a biological reflex, reacting exactly as Brom's story had conditioned him to. The next morning, the village found only a trampled saddle and a shattered pumpkin. Brom Bones married Katrina shortly after, and for the rest of his life he burst into a hearty laugh whenever the story of the pumpkin was mentioned. Years later, rumors arrived that Ichabod hadn't been spirited away at all. Driven by fear of the ghost and mortification from Katrina's rejection, he had fled the valley, eventually studying law and becoming a justice in a distant part of the country. Ultimately, the legend suggests that in an environment soaked in fear, physical brawn is unnecessary. Brom Bones proved that against an intellectual rival, you don't need a sword or a horseman. You just need a pumpkin, and the dark, and a mind that already wants to believe in ghosts.